Deep beneath the Earth's surface, where ancient limestone had been carved by centuries of patient hands, oil lamps cast their warm glow across one of history's most remarkable discoveries. The flickering light revealed something that would leave even modern archaeologists speechless: an enormous underground sanctuary filled wall to wall with pottery offerings that numbered in the tens of thousands. Mount Ida's southern slopes had concealed this sacred chamber for millennia, and within its cool depths lay evidence of humanity's earliest attempts to bridge the gap between the mortal and divine realms. Every single ceramic vessel told a story of pilgrimage, of desperate hope, of unwavering faith carried by travelers who had journeyed from across the island to reach this hallowed ground at Camara's. What makes this discovery absolutely staggering is the sheer scale of devotion it represents. Generation after generation had made the difficult trek up these mountainous paths, each person carrying their carefully crafted offering into the sacred darkness. These weren't just random religious trinkets, they were the physical manifestation of an entire civilization's spiritual awakening, marking the birth of what historians now recognize as Europe's first sophisticated religious tradition. The timing of these events places us at one of history's most pivotal moments. While mighty pharaohs were commanding armies of workers to construct those legendary pyramids along the fertile banks of the Nile River, and while the world's first urban centers were flourishing across the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, something equally revolutionary was taking root on what appeared to be nothing more than a remote island in the Mediterranean's sparkling waters. But appearances can be deceiving. What was emerging on this island would eventually eclipse every contemporary civilization in terms of artistic sophistication, technological innovation, and most remarkably, its commitment to peaceful coexistence rather than conquest and warfare. The island itself reads like a masterpiece of natural engineering, as if some divine architect had deliberately designed the perfect foundation for human greatness, stretching across 160 magnificent miles from its easternmost promontories to its western cliffs. This mountainous landmass occupies perhaps the most enviable position in the entire ancient world, suspended like a precious jewel between three continental powerhouses. Consider the strategic brilliance of this location. The island's southern harbors open directly toward Egypt, that ancient fountain of wisdom, wealth, and architectural marvels. Turn eastward, and you're facing Anatolia, a rising force that would soon control crucial overland trade routes connecting Asia with Europe. Look north, and you'll see the scattered Cycladic islands creating a natural archipelago highway stretching toward the Greek mainland. This wasn't merely fortunate geography, this was the ancient world's equivalent of controlling the most important intersection in a bustling metropolis. Every merchant vessel carrying precious cargo between civilizations, every diplomatic mission seeking to forge new alliances, every explorer pushing the boundaries of the known world would inevitably find themselves passing through these crystal-clear waters. The island's natural advantages extended far beyond its strategic positioning. Nestled between towering mountain ranges lay fertile valleys that seemed designed specifically to support human civilization without requiring the massive infrastructure projects that defined other early societies. While Egyptian civilization depended entirely on the Nile's annual floods and required enormous irrigation systems, while Mesopotamian cities demanded complex canal networks to channel river water across desert landscapes, this island offered something far more sustainable: natural abundance that could support prosperity through diversity rather than dependence. The Mediterranean climate blessed these valleys with reliable sunshine and seasonal rainfall that nourished wheat fields, barley crops, olive groves, and vineyards without requiring human intervention. Wild game roamed freely through the mountainous interior, providing protein for growing populations, while the surrounding seas teemed with fish species that could feed entire communities. This natural bounty meant that islanders could focus their energy and creativity on developing arts, crafts, and technologies, rather than merely surviving harsh environmental conditions. When the Bronze Age revolution began transforming the eastern Mediterranean roughly 3,000 years before Christ's birth, this island was already home to thriving communities that had learned to harness their environment's gifts with remarkable sophistication. Archaeological evidence reveals scattered farming settlements dotting the landscape, each one representing generations of accumulated knowledge about agriculture, animal husbandry, and resource management. Carbon-14 analysis of charcoal remains discovered at these ancient sites tells an incredible story of steady growth and increasing complexity. What began as simple Neolithic hamlets gradually evolved into substantial villages featuring stone foundations and pottery that demonstrates both practical expertise and genuine artistic vision. The transformation wasn't sudden or violent, it was organic, sustainable, and remarkably peaceful. At Knossos, located in the island's north-central region, archaeological layers reveal continuous human habitation stretching back to 7000 BC, making it one of Europe's oldest permanently occupied sites. Each excavation level tells part of a larger story about human progress and social development. The earliest inhabitants lived in simple pit houses dug directly into the earth, but these gradually gave way to rectangular limestone structures that required sophisticated construction techniques and community cooperation. The pottery evolution alone provides fascinating insights into this civilization's developing character. Basic earthenware vessels designed purely for practical storage and cooking slowly transformed into elegant ceramic masterpieces decorated with spirals, geometric patterns, and flowing lines that revealed both technical mastery and artistic sensibility. These weren't just functional objects, they were expressions of a culture that valued beauty alongside utility. These masterful seal engravings offer us an incredible window into the everyday experiences of these ancient islanders. The intricate carvings capture mesmerizing scenes of daily existence, elegant vessels gliding across waves rendered in flowing, stylized patterns, human forms frozen in mysterious ceremonial positions, domesticated animals alongside their wild counterparts, and enigmatic symbols whose meanings continue to puzzle scholars today. The pace of technological breakthrough throughout the third millennium was absolutely breathtaking. Around the millennium's midpoint, island craftsmen encountered a game-changing innovation that would transform their entire approach to ceramic creation, the potter's wheel. This revolutionary device, likely learned through interactions with skilled artisans from Syria or Egypt, completely transformed what had previously been a laborious hand-building process into an art form capable of producing flawlessly balanced vessels with impossibly thin walls and graceful curves that seemed to defy gravity itself. The introduction of this spinning marvel elevated pottery from mere utilitarian necessity into genuine artistic expression. Suddenly, craftsmen could achieve levels of symmetry and elegance that had been impossible using traditional coil and pinch methods. The transformation was so dramatic that archaeologists can pinpoint exactly when this technology arrived by examining pottery fragments. There's a clear before and after moment when crude, thick-walled vessels give way to sophisticated, paper-thin masterpieces. Metalworking expertise reached unprecedented levels of complexity as skilled smiths tackled one of bronze production's greatest challenges, mastering the precise art of combining copper with tin. This wasn't simply melting two metals together. It required understanding exact ratios, temperature control, and timing that could only come from years of dedicated experimentation. The resulting bronze was significantly harder and more resilient than pure copper, but creating it demanded access to tin from incredibly distant sources. The logistics alone were staggering. Tin deposits were scarce and scattered across vast distances, possibly originating in Anatolia's remote mountain regions, the Caucasus Highlands, or incredibly, even the distant mines of Afghanistan. The fact that island metalworkers consistently obtained this crucial component proves their commercial networks had achieved truly remarkable geographical reach, stretching across thousands of miles of dangerous terrain and unpredictable seas. Building techniques underwent steady refinement throughout these transformative centuries. Master builders developed sophisticated methods for constructing multi-level structures using precisely fitted stone foundations topped with timber-framed upper stories. These flat-roofed buildings, supported by carefully calculated wooden beam systems, allowed communities to expand vertically rather than simply sprawling outward. The upper levels provided valuable additional space for storage, workshops, and family activities, while making efficient use of limited urban land. These construction innovations would eventually evolve into the magnificent architectural traditions that defined the later palatial era. Every technique, every refinement, every lesson learned from structural failures contributed to an accumulated knowledge base that would soon support some of the ancient world's most ambitious building projects. Agricultural intensification became essential as population centers grew larger and more complex. Ingenious farmers carved terraced fields into steep hillsides, dramatically expanding cultivatable land, while simultaneously preventing the soil erosion that plagued less sophisticated societies. This wasn't random agricultural expansion, it was careful environmental engineering that maximized productivity while protecting long-term sustainability. Olive cultivation experienced explosive growth as farmers discovered these remarkable trees could flourish on marginal lands, completely unsuitable for grain production. This discovery was revolutionary because olives provided multiple valuable products that transformed the entire economy. The oil served countless purposes: cooking, lighting lamps, religious ceremonies, and even preserving other foods. The olives themselves provided nutritious food that could be stored for months. The wood supplied excellent construction material and fuel. Even the pressed pulp could be used as fertilizer. Craft specialization reached extraordinary levels as prosperous communities could support dedicated artisans who focused exclusively on perfecting their skills rather than dividing time between production and farming. Potters, metalworkers, stone carvers, and textile producers developed workshops where they could dedicate themselves entirely to their crafts. This concentrated expertise led to dramatic quality improvements and opened entirely new possibilities for artistic innovation. Textile production achieved remarkable sophistication, evidenced by later artistic representations and the elegance of preserved clothing fragments. Island sheep provided high-quality wool, while flax plants cultivated in fertile valley bottoms supplied fibers for creating fine linen. The warm Mediterranean climate allowed for lightweight, brilliantly colored garments that would later astound foreign visitors with their refinement and comfort. Naval technology advanced at breakneck speed as islanders absorbed knowledge from experienced mariners arriving from Cyprus, Syria, and Egypt. Early ship designs captured in seal engravings and later wall paintings featured distinctive high prows and elevated sterns perfectly engineered for Mediterranean sailing conditions. These vessels, constructed from local cypress and pine timber, could transport substantial cargo loads while maintaining the speed and agility necessary for successful long-distance voyages. Permanent trading posts began appearing during this period, as shrewd merchants recognized the advantages of maintaining permanent bases in foreign ports. Small island settlements emerged throughout the Cycladic archipelago, functioning as crucial intermediate stations facilitating commerce between the homeland and mainland territories. These overseas establishments would eventually expand into a comprehensive network of commercial bases spanning the entire Aegean Sea. Cultural exchange accelerated dramatically as international contacts multiplied exponentially. Egyptian artistic influences began appearing in local artwork and religious imagery. Anatolian metalworking techniques enhanced production capabilities. Syrian ceramic styles inspired innovative designs. This cosmopolitan influence, filtered through distinctive local creativity, produced a unique cultural synthesis unlike anything seen elsewhere in the ancient world. Population growth combined with economic prosperity created perfect conditions for revolutionary social changes. During the early second millennium, successful farming communities had accumulated sufficient surpluses to support specialists, artists, and administrators who contributed to society without directly producing food. Thriving commercial networks generated wealth that could fund ambitious construction projects on scales previously unimaginable. Around 2000 BC, successful local leaders initiated construction of the first monumental buildings that would eventually evolve into the magnificent palatial complexes. These early structures, modest compared to their spectacular successors, but impressive by any contemporary standard, marked the beginning of a completely new era in Mediterranean civilization. The scattered farming communities of 3 millennia earlier had transformed into a sophisticated proto-urban civilization capable of supporting tens of thousands of inhabitants. A prosperous, diversified economy sustained growing populations across multiple urban centers. Extensive commercial networks connected the island to the broader Mediterranean world. Sophisticated craft traditions had developed distinctive artistic styles that influenced cultures across vast distances. Spiritual beliefs provided social cohesion and cultural identity that unified diverse communities under shared values. Most importantly, a tradition emphasizing peaceful cooperation rather than military competition had taken deep root throughout island society. By the dawn of the second millennium, every foundation necessary for greatness stood firmly in place. Europe's first true civilization was ready to construct the magnificent palatial centers that would establish the island realm as the Mediterranean's premier maritime power. The second millennium's opening brought revolutionary transformations to this island civilization. What had begun as modest ceremonial centers rapidly evolved into architectural marvels that would leave the ancient world speechless with admiration. At Knossos, Phaistos, Melia, and Zakros, visionary rulers commanded construction of massive complexes that fundamentally redefined Mediterranean society's possibilities. These weren't military fortresses designed for warfare and defense. Instead, they were centers of prosperity, specifically engineered for peaceful cooperation and cultural exchange. The first great structure at Knossos, initiated around 1900 BC, sprawled across more than 4 acres of carefully planned ground space. Its labyrinthine arrangement of rooms, corridors, and courtyards seemed to grow organically from the natural landscape, creating a harmonious blend of human architecture and environmental integration. Unlike the defensive citadels that characterize contemporary cultures throughout the region, these magnificent buildings opened themselves welcomingly to visitors, traders, diplomats, and pilgrims arriving from across the known world. Their design philosophy emphasized accessibility, beauty, and functionality rather than military defense or intimidation. Among the most intriguing mysteries left behind by this remarkable civilization lies their enigmatic writing system, known today as Linear A. Despite decades of scholarly effort, this ancient script continues to guard its secrets, offering only tantalizing fragments of insight into the incredibly sophisticated administrative machinery that orchestrated their complex economic empire. What researchers have managed to decode reveals something absolutely extraordinary, a bureaucratic system of meticulous precision that would impress even modern governments. These ancient administrators maintained incredibly detailed records covering every aspect of their economy: precise livestock counts, comprehensive land ownership registers, craft production targets, and even spiritual tribute inventories. The scope of their record-keeping demonstrates that these bureaucrats possessed intimate knowledge of economic activity spanning their entire territorial holdings. The portions of Linear A that scholars can interpret with confidence primarily involve numerical data and commodity symbols. Through these decipherable elements, we discover that scribes methodically tracked thousands upon thousands of sheep, hundreds of valuable cattle, and enormous quantities of manufactured goods using a sophisticated decimal system that enabled complex mathematical calculations across vast geographical distances. Their standardization efforts were remarkably advanced for the ancient world. Unified measurement units for grain, precious olive oil, and other essential commodities allowed administrators to manage resources with mathematical precision across territories separated by mountain ranges and sea channels. This level of systematic organization required not just administrator skill, but genuine mathematical sophistication that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. The evolution of seals and their administrative applications reached unprecedented levels of complexity during this golden age. Intricately carved hieroglyphic seals featuring elaborate spiritual symbols and governmental emblems served multiple crucial functions: authenticating official documents, verifying ownership of valuable goods, and establishing clear chains of administrative responsibility. Government officials employed distinctive seal designs as early forms of identification, creating accountability systems that ensured proper authorization throughout their hierarchical structure. Each seal was essentially a unique signature that could be traced back to specific individuals, making fraud or unauthorized transactions extremely difficult to accomplish without detection. Craft specialization within these magnificent complexes achieved levels that seem almost industrial by ancient standards. Entire building sections were dedicated exclusively to specific manufacturing activities: pottery workshops, metalworking forges, textile production centers, and stone carving studios operated like specialized factories coordinated by administrative oversight. Archaeological evidence from these workshop areas tells compelling stories through the tools, raw materials, and half-finished products left behind. These remnants document intensive manufacturing operations that required careful coordination between administrators, master craftsmen, and skilled workers to maintain consistent quality and meet production quotas. The artistic masterpieces emerging from these specialized workshops completely revolutionized Mediterranean aesthetic traditions. Frescoes painted in brilliant blues, vivid reds, and golden yellows created from expensive imported pigments depicted scenes of natural beauty and human elegance that shattered the rigid artistic conventions dominating Egyptian and Mesopotamian art. These wall paintings brought unprecedented life and movement to interior spaces. Graceful dolphins danced playfully across bathroom walls, while sophisticated court ladies sporting elaborate hairstyles participated in sacred ceremonies rendered with remarkable attention to detail and individual personality. Marine themes absolutely dominated decorative traditions, reflecting these islanders' profound spiritual and practical connection to the surrounding seas that both protected and sustained their civilization. Octopi with sinuous, flowing tentacles decorated ceramic vessels with naturalistic grace, while schools of flying fish appeared to swim effortlessly across interior walls. These naturalistic artistic representations revealed a completely different philosophical approach to art, one that celebrated the inherent beauty of the natural world, rather than emphasizing human dominance over environmental forces. This artistic philosophy reflected broader cultural values that prioritized harmony and cooperation over conquest and domination. Open architectural design characterized every aspect of these magnificent structures, from grand staircases that welcomed visitors with impressive hospitality to spacious courtyards where thousands could gather for community ceremonies and festivals. The complete absence of defensive walls surrounding these complexes demonstrates the remarkable security and confidence these rulers enjoyed in their peaceful approach to governance. While contemporary societies throughout the region invested enormous resources in constructing massive fortifications to protect their centers of power, island leaders placed their trust in naval supremacy rather than land-based defensive strategies. This strategic choice reflected their fundamental confidence in peaceful diplomacy and economic cooperation rather than military intimidation. Evidence supporting the peaceful nature of this extraordinary culture accumulates from multiple archaeological sources. Military weapons appear remarkably rarely in excavated contexts. Though when discovered, they seem designed for ceremonial display rather than actual combat applications. Beautiful bronze daggers featuring gold-inlaid handles were clearly artistic masterpieces created for ritual purposes, not battlefield weapons. The elaborate ceremonial vessels and sacred equipment filling storage rooms stand in dramatic contrast to the military arsenals that characterized other Bronze Age power centers throughout the Mediterranean region. This civilization invested in beauty, spirituality, and economic prosperity rather than weapons of war. The naval supremacy enabling this remarkable peaceful prosperity becomes clearly evident through archaeological remains discovered across the entire Aegean region. Pottery fragments, seal impressions, and other distinctive artifacts demonstrate extensive commercial and cultural influence throughout the Cycladic Islands and along the Greek mainland coastlines. This maritime empire operated through economic attraction and cultural prestige rather than military coercion, spreading prosperity and innovation wherever their merchants established mutually beneficial trading relationships. Their approach to imperial expansion was revolutionary. They built influence through demonstration of superior quality of life rather than through conquest and subjugation. The Cycladic Islands functioned as crucial stepping stones for expanding commercial networks that eventually reached every corner of the eastern Mediterranean world. On strategically important islands like Thera and Melos, local communities voluntarily adopted building styles, artistic motifs, and spiritual practices directly inspired by the great palatial centers. These voluntary cultural adoptions reveal the genuine prestige and attractiveness of this advanced island society. Communities chose to emulate their practices because they recognized superior approaches to architecture, art, and social organization that could improve their own quality of life. Mainland Greece experienced profound cultural transformation through sustained contact with this sophisticated civilization. At emerging centers like Mycenae and Pylos, local rulers eagerly adopted construction techniques, artistic styles, and governmental practices learned from island merchants and skilled craftsmen who shared their knowledge freely. The famous shaft graves of Mycenae, filled with golden masks and elaborate ceremonial weapons, clearly show artistic influences from island traditions combined with mainland preferences for military display. This cultural blending created new synthesis traditions that would influence Mediterranean development for centuries. These ancient script tablets offer us absolutely mesmerizing windows into the administrative machinery that orchestrated this incredibly complex civilization. Even though scholars remain unable to fully decode their meaning, the numerical annotations and identifiable location names reveal an organizational network of staggering sophistication, one that systematically monitored resources, controlled distribution systems, and synchronized activities across hundreds of scattered communities throughout their territory. The advanced record-keeping capabilities demonstrated in these remarkable documents enabled government administrators to oversee economic operations on a scale that wouldn't be witnessed again anywhere in Europe for more than 1,000 years. The sheer scope of their bureaucratic reach represents one of humanity's earliest examples of large-scale systematic governance. However, the boundaries of contemporary scholarly understanding regarding this mysterious writing system have created one of archaeology's most maddening enigmas. While researchers can successfully interpret numerical data, recognize certain geographical references, and identify various commodity symbols, the fundamental grammatical framework and vocabulary of the underlying language remain completely impenetrable to modern analysis. This linguistic isolation strongly suggests that these ancient inhabitants communicated using a non-Indo-European language completely unrelated to later Greek dialects, making successful decipherment extraordinarily challenging for contemporary linguists. The language appears to have vanished entirely from human memory, leaving behind only these tantalizing fragments carved in clay. Artistic expression and architectural design from this remarkable period reflected a distinctive philosophical worldview that celebrated universal harmony through human creative achievement. The intricate geometric patterns decorating floor surfaces, the lifelike frescoes covering interior walls, and the graceful pottery filling storage chambers all embodied a sophisticated aesthetic philosophy that discovered divine beauty in both mathematical perfection and organic natural forms. The masterful integration of indoor and outdoor living spaces demonstrated profound appreciation for environmental harmony. Carefully planned gardens, spacious courtyards, and elegant terraces created fluid transitions between constructed and natural environments, while strategically placed large windows and open doorways guaranteed that fresh Mediterranean breezes and abundant natural sunlight filled every interior space. This revolutionary design philosophy would eventually inspire classical Greek and Roman architectural traditions, influencing building approaches that prioritized human comfort and environmental integration over purely defensive considerations. Technological breakthroughs pioneered in specialized workshops spread rapidly throughout the Mediterranean world through peaceful commercial relationships. Advanced ceramic techniques, sophisticated metalworking methods, and innovative construction solutions developed by master craftsmen were eagerly adopted by communities across vast geographical regions. The peaceful nature of this cultural transmission meant that valuable innovations could be shared openly and freely, rather than jealously guarded as military secrets. This open approach to knowledge sharing accelerated technological progress throughout the entire region. The economic foundations supporting this remarkable prosperity relied on diversified production systems rather than exploitation of conquered populations. Agricultural estates, craft manufacturing workshops, and international trading enterprises all contributed essential wealth that funded ambitious construction projects and supported the elaborate court lifestyle depicted in surviving wall paintings. This broad-based economic approach proved remarkably resilient compared to military empires that depended entirely on constant conquest for financial sustainability. Economic diversity provided stability that military aggression could never match, International diplomatic relations during this golden period demonstrate the extraordinary respect and admiration that this island culture commanded among contemporary regional powers. Egyptian diplomatic texts specifically mention formal contacts, while Mesopotamian sources reference the exotic luxury goods and exceptionally skilled craftsmen that originated from these mysterious islands floating in the Mediterranean's heart. These peaceful diplomatic relationships facilitated cultural exchange programs that enriched all participating civilizations, creating a web of mutual benefit that strengthened regional stability. The sophisticated urban planning, evident throughout these complexes and their associated towns, created living environments that prioritized human comfort and meaningful social interaction above all other considerations. Broad corridors encouraged natural movement and spontaneous gatherings, while numerous spacious courtyards provided dedicated spaces for community activities, festivals, and civic ceremonies. The seamless integration of manufacturing workshops, governmental administrative areas, and residential quarters within single architectural structures created humanity's first true cities, designed for both maximum efficiency and superior quality of life. By 1600 BC, this extraordinary society had achieved its absolute pinnacle of political power and cultural accomplishment. 4 major palatial centers successfully coordinated the economic and spiritual activities of dozens of substantial towns and hundreds of productive rural communities spread across their island paradise. Merchant fleets regularly carried the island's superior products to every accessible corner of the Mediterranean world, while foreign dignitaries, merchants, and curious visitors traveled great distances to personally witness the architectural marvels and artistic achievements that made this relatively small island the undisputed envy of the entire ancient world. The unprecedented prosperity and remarkable security that characterized this golden age appeared absolutely unshakable to contemporary observers. Massive storage facilities overflowed with agricultural surpluses. Specialized workshops consistently produced goods of unmatched quality and beauty, and religious festivals regularly drew enthusiastic pilgrims from distant foreign lands. The peaceful foundation of this maritime empire had created what seemed like an eternally stable platform for continued expansion and cultural development. Leaders and citizens alike believed their civilization had achieved permanent greatness that would endure for countless generations. Yet beneath the glittering surface of this unprecedented prosperity, subtle geological forces were quietly building toward catastrophic changes that would soon transform the Mediterranean world forever. Far to the north, on the volcanic island of Thera, massive subterranean pressures were accumulating toward one of recorded history's most devastating natural disasters. The volcanic explosion that would eventually follow would severely test every fundamental assumption about permanence and security that this advanced society had carefully constructed over 4 centuries of peaceful development and steady growth. Centuries after these magnificent centers fell mysteriously silent, Greek storytellers would weave captivating tales about a mighty monarch named Minos, who supposedly ruled from a fantastical royal palace filled with impossible corridors and deadly hidden secrets. These enduring legends spoke of Pasiphae, the queen who developed forbidden love for a sacred bull creature, and their monstrous offspring, the terrifying Minotaur, forever imprisoned within an inescapable maze called the Labyrinth. According to these mythical accounts, every 7 years Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women as human sacrifices to feed this beast, until the legendary hero Theseus finally slayed the monster and escaped using a magical thread provided by the king's daughter, Ariadne. These powerful stories actually preserve distant cultural memories of a very real maritime empire that had once completely dominated the Aegean region. The labyrinthine corridors that so fascinated later Greek imaginations were not mythical constructions, but actual architectural features of the great palatial centers, whose genuinely complex layouts must have resembled bewildering mazes to foreign visitors encountering them for the first time. The bovine worship that seems so exotic and disturbing to classical Greeks had indeed been central to ancient beliefs, though the historical reality was far more sophisticated and meaningful than the gruesome myths suggested. When Sir Arthur Evans began his groundbreaking excavations at Knossos in 1900, he immediately recognized the profound connections between archaeological reality and mythological memory. The twisted passages, the elaborate throne room, the spectacular wall paintings depicting athletic bull-leaping ceremonies, all these discoveries breathed new life into the ancient stories that scholars had previously dismissed as pure fantasy. Evans himself coined the term Minoan for this lost culture, naming it after the legendary King Minos, whose very existence had been completely dismissed as mythological fiction until archaeological spades revealed the undeniable magnificence of his supposed realm. The throne room at Knossos, with its alabaster seats still perfectly positioned after 3.5 millennia, provided the most dramatic physical link between myth and historical reality. Here, surrounded by painted griffins and ritual vessels, a real ruler had once held court under circumstances that must have seemed absolutely magical to Bronze Age visitors from simpler societies. Perhaps most intriguingly, no royal burial sites comparable to Egypt's magnificent pyramids or Mesopotamia's towering ziggurats have ever been uncovered by archaeologists. This remarkable absence strongly suggests that political authority was distributed far more broadly throughout society than in typical Bronze Age monarchies that concentrated absolute power in single dynastic rulers. This extraordinary civilization operated as a sophisticated theocracy, governed by priest-kings who derived their legitimacy from sacred spiritual sources rather than military might or inherited bloodlines. The elaborate ceremonial chambers discovered in every major palatial center, the complete absence of defensive fortifications, and the overwhelming prominence of ritual artifacts throughout archaeological sites all provide compelling evidence supporting this religious foundation of political authority. These spiritual leaders governed their territories through religious charisma and sophisticated economic coordination rather than through intimidation, fear, and military conquest. Their power flowed from their perceived connection to divine forces rather than from their ability to wage war against neighboring societies. The religious iconography discovered throughout these centers revealed an incredibly complex belief system that completely rejected the anthropomorphic tendencies that characterized most other ancient civilizations. Instead of creating gods in human form like their Egyptian and Mesopotamian contemporaries, local artists consistently preferred abstract symbolic representations, the sacred double axe, the mystical horns of consecration, the holy pillar, the divine tree of life. These powerful symbols appeared consistently on seal stones, painted interior walls, decorated pottery vessels, and ritual ceremonial objects, creating a unified visual language that effectively communicated sacred concepts across their entire territorial realm. This consistent symbolic system demonstrates remarkable cultural unity, despite geographical diversity. Mountain peak temples scattered across the dramatic landscape served as crucial focal points for this distributed spiritual system. At Juktus, Petsaphans, and dozens of other elevated sacred sites, local communities regularly gathered to participate in elaborate ceremonies that connected neighborhood worship practices with realm-wide religious traditions. The strategic positioning of these mountaintop temples created an interconnected network of sacred geography that successfully unified diverse regional populations under shared religious practices and beliefs. Pilgrims could see multiple sacred sites from any single location, reinforcing their sense of belonging to a unified spiritual community. Underground cave temples provided yet another fascinating dimension to this remarkably complex worship system. The sacred cavern at Psychro, later associated with Zeus's birth in classical Greek mythology, contained literally thousands of devotional offerings spanning multiple centuries of continuous use. Bronze figurines, ceramic vessels, and precious ornamental objects left behind by countless pilgrims created archaeological deposits that document uninterrupted religious activity from the civilization's earliest periods through its mysterious final collapse. These cave sanctuaries served as spiritual bridges connecting past, present, and future generations. At Anemospilia, positioned high on Mount Juktus's northern slopes, archaeologists made one of their most shocking discoveries, the only clear evidence of human sacrifice in this civilization's entire documented history. Within a small temple structure destroyed by earthquake, excavators found the skeletal remains of a young man positioned on an altar, a bronze ritual blade beside his body, and a priest apparently caught in the act of performing the ceremony when the building suddenly collapsed. This single dramatic discovery stands in stark contrast to thousands of peaceful religious sites found throughout their territory, emphasizing just how extraordinarily rare such violence was in this generally harmonious culture. The rarity makes the discovery even more archaeologically significant. The continuing mystery of their undeciphered writing system adds yet another layer of complexity to understanding this sophisticated society. While modern scholars can successfully interpret the numerical systems and recognize various commodity symbols in their linear A script, the fundamental grammatical structure and vocabulary remain completely impenetrable to contemporary analysis. This linguistic isolation clearly indicates that these ancient inhabitants communicated using a language completely unrelated to any known language family, making their script one of the world's most frustrating undeciphered writing systems. Generations of linguists have attempted to crack this code without success. Nevertheless, the surviving tablets reveal evidence of incredibly sophisticated bureaucratic systems that systematically tracked resources, managed complex distribution networks, and coordinated activities across hundreds of scattered communities. The mathematical precision evident in these administrative records, combined with the standardized weights and measurement systems found throughout their territory, demonstrated governmental capabilities that wouldn't be matched anywhere in Europe for over 1,000 years. The complete absence of identifiable military leadership created another major puzzle for understanding how this maritime empire maintained its regional dominance without apparent armed forces. These rulers left behind no elaborate warrior burial sites, no military iconography decorating their palaces, and remarkably little archaeological evidence for organized warfare or military hierarchical structures. This peaceful orientation was genuinely authentic, rather than simply the result of incomplete archaeological preservation. Instead of expanding through military conquest like their contemporaries, this empire grew through economic attraction and cultural influence that made voluntary participation more appealing than resistance. Communities throughout the Aegean region voluntarily adopted their architectural styles, decorative motifs, and technological innovations, clearly indicating that membership in their commercial network provided tangible benefits that far outweighed any potential loss of local political autonomy. This soft power approach to imperial expansion created a remarkably stable political system that successfully endured for multiple centuries without the constant rebellions and military campaigns that plagued other ancient empires. The comparison with contemporary Bronze Age societies made this peaceful orientation even more extraordinary and historically unique. While Mesopotamian kings proudly boasted in their inscriptions about cities destroyed and enemies slaughtered in battle, while Egyptian pharaohs commissioned elaborate relief carvings showing endless rows of bound captives from their military campaigns, these rulers left behind visual records celebrating natural beauty, athletic achievement, and religious devotion. This fundamental difference in cultural values shaped every single aspect of their remarkable civilization, from their architecture to their art, from their religion to their international relations. The extensive trade networks that emerged from this peaceful approach created unprecedented prosperity throughout the entire eastern Mediterranean region. Merchant vessels regularly carried their superior products to Egypt, Syria, Anatolia, and even the western Mediterranean, while returning laden with exotic materials that enriched local production centers and enhanced the quality of life for ordinary citizens. Cyprus provided essential copper for bronze production. Distant Afghanistan supplied precious lapis lazuli for jewelry and decoration. Nubia contributed gold that funded the elaborate court lifestyle depicted so beautifully in surviving wall paintings. This international commerce created wealth that supported artistic achievement. The technological innovations that emerged from this prosperous economy completely revolutionized Bronze Age craftsmanship throughout the known world. Advanced pottery techniques, sophisticated metalworking methods, and innovative construction solutions developed in their specialized production centers spread rapidly throughout Mediterranean civilizations. The peaceful nature of this knowledge transmission meant that valuable innovations could be shared openly and freely, rather than jealously guarded as military secrets that might provide strategic advantages to potential enemies. Their creative traditions reached levels of artistic sophistication unmatched anywhere else in the Bronze Age world. The naturalistic wall paintings that decorated ceremonial chambers captured movement, emotion, and natural beauty with unprecedented technical skill and artistic sensitivity. Marine life appeared to swim across interior walls with such incredible lifelike quality that modern viewers can almost hear the splash of ocean waves and feel the Mediterranean breeze. The famous bull-leaping wall paintings provided the most dramatic examples of this artistic achievement, while simultaneously documenting one of history's most extraordinary athletic traditions. Young men and women, their bodies painted following Egyptian artistic conventions, but rendered with distinctly local artistic sensitivity, performed seemingly impossible acrobatic feats that masterfully combined religious devotion with supreme physical excellence and courage. These bull-leaping performances were indeed physically possible, though extremely dangerous and requiring years of intensive training. Athletes approaching charging animals at full speed would grasp the creature's horns and use the upward momentum of the animal's head movement to vault completely over its back in spectacular displays of human agility. The precise timing required for such performances demanded absolute years of dedicated training and complete fearlessness in the face of enormous physical danger. Modern analysis confirms these weren't symbolic representations, but actual athletic achievements. The religious significance of these performances related to profound themes of harmony between human skill and natural power. Rather than depicting human domination over animals, these scenes suggested cooperation, humans and bulls participating together in sacred ceremonial dramas that affirmed universal cosmic order. This interpretation perfectly fits with the broader cultural emphasis on balance and natural harmony evident throughout their entire visual artistic record. Gender equality in these athletic performances reflected broader patterns of women's remarkable participation in public life throughout this civilization. Unlike most Bronze Age societies where women remained largely confined to domestic spheres, this culture actively encouraged female participation in athletics, religious ceremonies, and quite possibly governmental leadership. The elegant court ladies depicted in surviving wall paintings wore elaborate costumes and precious jewelry that clearly marked them as persons of high social status and genuine political authority within their sophisticated society. In stark contrast to the fortress-like strongholds that dominated other ancient civilizations, these magnificent complexes opened their arms to embrace visitors through impressive entrances and expansive open courtyards. The seamless blending of manufacturing zones, administrative headquarters, and living quarters within individual architectural structures created humanity's very first genuine urban centers, specifically designed to optimize both operational efficiency and superior quality of life for their inhabitants. Craft specialization achieved absolutely unprecedented levels of sophistication within these revolutionary urban environments. Dedicated manufacturing districts for ceramic production, metalwork, textile creation, and stone sculpture employed literally hundreds of master artisans who devoted their entire professional lives exclusively to perfecting their individual trades. This intensive specialization enabled the creation of manufactured goods whose exceptional quality and stunning visual appeal wouldn't be matched anywhere in Europe for many subsequent centuries. The level of artistic achievement and technical mastery reached heights that seemed almost impossibly advanced for their historical period. The textile manufacturing industry, despite leaving only limited direct archaeological evidence, must have achieved extraordinary levels of sophistication, based on careful analysis of the elaborate garments depicted in surviving wall paintings. The intricate patterns, brilliant colors, and graceful draping illustrated in these visual representations required incredibly advanced weaving techniques and highly sophisticated dyeing processes that made their fabrics precious commodities sought throughout the Mediterranean world. Local shipbuilders developed maritime technology that enabled construction of ocean-going vessels capable of extended long-distance voyages while maintaining the substantial cargo capacity absolutely necessary for profitable international commerce. The ships illustrated in seal carvings and painted scenes featured distinctively elevated prows and stern sections that provided exceptional stability during rough weather conditions, while creating the elegant lines that transformed these vessels into floating works of art, as well as highly functional commercial craft. The extensive network of overseas trading establishments created by enterprising merchants represented the ancient world's first genuinely international commercial system spanning vast geographical distances, from the scattered Cycladic archipelago to the distant Levantine coastline. Their communities maintained permanent commercial bases that facilitated trade relationships while simultaneously spreading cultural influence throughout the region. These overseas settlements functioned as cultural windows through which local populations could directly observe and selectively adopt innovations from their technologically advanced homeland. The peaceful nature of this cultural transmission created voluntary adoption rather than forced imposition of foreign practices. The religious practices that flourished during this golden age produced some of the most mysteriously beautiful and artistically sophisticated artifacts ever discovered by archaeologists. The serpent goddess figurines, with their elaborate ceremonial costumes and mesmerizing reptilian companions, represented visual and spiritual achievements that continue to captivate modern observers with their otherworldly beauty and craftsmanship. These remarkable objects, discovered in both household shrines and major temple complexes, provide evidence of religious traditions that we can admire and study, but can never fully comprehend or recreate in their original cultural context. The masterful integration of natural and constructed environments that characterize their urban planning philosophy reflected profound philosophical commitments to achieving perfect harmony between human activities and natural environmental processes. Carefully designed gardens, spacious courtyards, and elegant terraces created absolutely seamless transitions between interior and exterior living spaces. Innovative architectural features like light wells guaranteed that buildings remained intimately connected to the natural rhythms of sunlight and weather patterns, ensuring that inhabitants never felt completely separated from the natural world that sustained them. The daily existence of ordinary citizens within this sophisticated society reveals truly remarkable levels of material comfort and social mobility that were completely unknown elsewhere in the Bronze Age world. Even farmers who worked the terraced hillsides lived in well-constructed stone houses featuring multiple rooms, dedicated storage areas, and frequently their own small private shrines dedicated to protective household deities. The abundance of high-quality pottery, bronze tools, and expensive imported goods discovered in even modest residential dwellings clearly demonstrates that economic prosperity extended far beyond the wealthy elite circles, reaching ordinary working families throughout their society. Educational opportunities for children prepared them for specialized roles within their complex economic system. Young boys destined for administrative careers received formal education in reading and writing, the linear A script within temple-sponsored schools, mastering the numerical systems and sophisticated record-keeping techniques that kept their empire functioning efficiently across vast territories. Girls from aristocratic families underwent intensive training in the elaborate rituals and ceremonial dances depicted in palace wall paintings, preparing them for influential roles as priestesses or high-ranking court officials who wielded genuine political authority. The medical knowledge preserved in scattered references and artistic representations reveals remarkably sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and advanced healing practices. Skilled physicians employed bronze surgical instruments to perform complex medical operations, while specialized herbalists prepared medicines from plants gathered throughout the Mediterranean region. The famous saffron gatherer painting from Knossos may actually illustrate the careful collection of medicinal crocus flowers, a tremendously valuable pharmaceutical ingredient traded across the entire ancient world for its healing properties. Legal systems, though not completely understood due to their undeciphered script, clearly operated on progressive principles, emphasizing compensation and restoration rather than harsh punishment and retribution. The complete absence of prison facilities or execution sites in major centers, combined with the consistently peaceful imagery found throughout their territory, strongly suggests that their justice system focused on restoring social harmony rather than inflicting suffering on wrongdoers. Legal disputes were probably resolved through careful arbitration by religious authorities who derived their legitimate authority from divine sources rather than military power or inherited wealth. The mathematical and geometric sophistication becomes clearly apparent through precise architectural measurements and pottery proportions that demonstrate advanced knowledge of complex geometric principles. Master builders consistently employed mathematical ratios that created visually pleasing harmonies while simultaneously ensuring optimal structural stability for their ambitious construction projects. The famous golden ratio appears repeatedly in palatial proportions, providing clear evidence that their architects understood fundamental aesthetic principles that wouldn't be formally codified by classical Greek mathematicians for several centuries. Their astronomical knowledge reached impressive levels of accuracy, demonstrated through the precise orientation of major buildings toward astronomically significant celestial events. The Great Hall at Knossos aligns perfectly with summer solstice sunrise, while various temple structures point directly toward the rising positions of important stars and constellations. This sophisticated celestial awareness enabled creation of remarkably accurate calendars that successfully coordinated agricultural activities and religious festivals across their entire territorial realm, ensuring perfect timing for both practical and spiritual activities. Music and dance occupied central roles in both religious worship and secular entertainment throughout their culture. The numerous lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments discovered in archaeological excavations reveal rich musical traditions that accompanied the elaborate ceremonies depicted in surviving wall paintings. Professional musicians clearly enjoyed elevated social status within their hierarchical society, evidenced by their prominent representation in palace artwork and their burial alongside valuable musical instruments that demonstrated their importance. The complexity of their religious philosophical thought becomes apparent through sophisticated symbolism employed consistently in sacred artwork. The double axe appearing in countless contexts symbolized divine power that possessed the ability to both create and destroy. Tree and pillar worship connected earthly communities with cosmic forces beyond human understanding. Meanwhile, the labyrinthine patterns discovered on pottery vessels and seal stones may have represented spiritual journeys through multiple levels of existence, reflecting complex beliefs about life, death, and rebirth. Foreign visitors to these great centers left detailed accounts, preserved in later Greek literature, describing a land of wonder and prosperity that seemed almost magical to contemporary observers from less advanced civilizations. Egyptian traders wrote admiringly of palaces that surpassed even pharaonic residences in elegance and comfort. Syrian merchants consistently praised both the exceptional quality of their craftsmanship and the remarkable fairness of their commercial dealings. These testimonies, filtered through centuries of oral retelling, contributed significantly to the mythological reputation that would ultimately outlast the civilization itself. The crucial role of festivals in maintaining social cohesion throughout their diverse territories simply cannot be overstated in importance. These magnificent seasonal celebrations successfully brought together thousands of people from across entire territorial regions, creating invaluable opportunities for commercial trade, marriage arrangements, and profound cultural exchange between diverse communities. The enormous courtyards of major palatial centers possessed the capacity to accommodate literally thousands of enthusiastic participants in elaborate ceremonial events that masterfully combined genuine religious devotion with absolutely spectacular entertainment presentations. Athletic competitions extended far beyond the world-famous bull leaping performances to include intensive boxing matches, wrestling tournaments, and various forms of breathtaking acrobatic displays that demanded years of dedicated training. Both men and women participated actively in these challenging contests, which served important religious purposes, while simultaneously providing healthy outlets for competitive energy that might otherwise have potentially led to destructive military conflicts between neighboring communities. The complete absence of weapons in athletic contexts powerfully reinforces the fundamentally peaceful nature of their entire society. Their approach to competition emphasized skill, grace, and spiritual connection rather than violence or domination over opponents. The profound influence of their artistic styles on contemporary civilizations throughout the region clearly demonstrates the immense prestige and cultural attractiveness of this remarkable civilization. Egyptian tomb paintings began incorporating distinctly Cretan motifs and design elements, while Mesopotamian palace decorations featured artistic components clearly inspired by Aegean traditions and aesthetic philosophies. This sophisticated artistic diplomacy helped maintain peaceful relationships with powerful neighboring kingdoms who might otherwise have viewed their expanding maritime empire as a potential military threat to regional stability. The environmental management practices developed by local communities demonstrate truly remarkable foresight and ecological awareness that was centuries ahead of their time. Terraced agricultural systems effectively prevented destructive soil erosion while simultaneously maximizing crop yields from available farmland. Careful forest management programs ensured sustainable timber supplies for both construction projects and shipbuilding industries. Marine conservation practices suggested by the reverent treatment of sea life consistently portrayed in artistic representations may have actively helped maintain the fish populations that provided essential protein for coastal communities throughout their territory. The technological innovations emerging from their specialized workshops and production centers significantly influenced technological development across the entire Mediterranean world. Advanced ceramic firing techniques consistently produced pottery of exceptional quality and remarkable durability that set new standards for the industry. Sophisticated metallurgical methods enabled master craftsmen to create bronze alloys with precisely controlled properties specifically designed for different practical applications. These groundbreaking innovations spread rapidly through established trade networks, raising technological standards throughout the entire region. By the middle of the 16th century, before the Common Era, this extraordinary civilization had achieved unprecedented levels of prosperity, creative achievement, and international influence unmatched anywhere in the Bronze Age world. The great palatial centers buzzed with constant activity as master craftsmen created objects of absolutely breathtaking beauty and sophistication. Skilled administrators successfully coordinated complex economic activity across hundreds of scattered communities, while elaborate religious festivals consistently drew enthusiastic pilgrims from distant foreign lands seeking spiritual enlightenment and cultural exchange. The fundamentally peaceful nature of this maritime empire had created an unprecedented historical period of political stability and remarkable social flowering that benefited everyone within their sphere of influence. Extensive trade networks carried their cultural influence to every accessible corner of the eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the complete absence of military pressure allowed local traditions to blend freely and naturally with innovations from their sophisticated homeland, creating rich cultural syntheses that enhanced rather than replaced existing practices. This golden age seemed absolutely destined to continue indefinitely into the future. The foundations appeared unshakable, the prosperity seemed permanent, and the peaceful approach to international relations had proven its effectiveness over centuries of successful implementation. Yet geological forces completely beyond human control were steadily building toward a catastrophe that would severely test every fundamental assumption about permanence and security that this advanced society had developed over 4 centuries of peaceful prosperity. Far to the north on the volcanic island territory that later Greeks would call Thera, immense geological pressures were steadily approaching a critical threshold point. The massive explosion that would eventually follow would dramatically reshape not only the physical landscape of the Aegean, but the entire subsequent course of Mediterranean history for centuries to come. 70 miles north of Crete, the deceptively peaceful island of Thera rose majestically from the deep blue Aegean waters like a sleeping geological giant. For countless generations, its remarkably fertile slopes had supported thriving communities that truly embodied the absolute pinnacle of Bronze Age achievement and sophisticated urban planning. Elaborate residential houses featuring sophisticated drainage systems lined carefully paved streets, while magnificent wall paintings depicted dolphins, antelopes, and young boxers in scenes of peaceful prosperity and cultural refinement. The inhabitants had absolutely no reason to suspect that beneath their comfortable feet, one of Earth's most powerful volcanic systems was steadily approaching a catastrophic awakening. The sheer scientific magnitude of what occurred at this location during the late Bronze Age absolutely staggers the modern imagination. The volcanic explosivity index rates eruptions on a standardized scale from 0 to 8, with each progressive level representing a 10-fold increase in explosive power and destructive potential. The Thera blast achieved a terrifying rating of 6 or 7, making it comparable to the famous Krakatoa explosion in 1883, but potentially much larger in terms of total energy released and regional impact. When the climactic phase finally began, It released concentrated energy equivalent to several hundred nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously in the same geographical location. The sequence of destruction unfolded systematically over several distinct phases, each phase proving more devastating than the previous one. Initial earthquake swarms shook the entire region for weeks, causing buildings to crack and develop structural weaknesses while prompting residents to flee in growing numbers towards safer locations. These preliminary tremors providentially provided advance warnings that saved countless lives. Archaeological teams have discovered remarkably few human skeletal remains in the debris-covered ruins of Crete, the island's major settlement, suggesting that most inhabitants successfully evacuated before the final catastrophic phase. Pumice stones and volcanic debris began falling like deadly snow across the southern Aegean region. The first major explosive phase hurled volcanic material high into the upper atmosphere, where prevailing wind patterns carried the dangerous fallout across hundreds of miles of ocean and land. Ships caught in the open sea found themselves pelted with hot volcanic stones, while coastal communities watched helplessly as the sky turned ominously black with approaching clouds of superheated particles and toxic gases. The pyroclastic flows that followed represented destruction on an almost incomprehensible scale of devastation. These superheated avalanches of gas, debris, and rock fragments raced down the volcanic slopes at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, with internal temperatures reaching an incredible 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Nothing in their path could possibly survive such extreme conditions. Buildings instantly disintegrated, trees completely vaporized, and the sea itself literally boiled where the flows entered the water, creating massive steam explosions. The caldera formation that climaxed this catastrophe created a circular depression nearly 6 miles across. As the emptied magma chamber beneath the island could no longer support the enormous weight of the overlying rock, the entire landmass literally collapsed into itself, creating a geological wound that remains clearly visible today. This catastrophic process triggered the most destructive phase of the entire event. Massive tsunami waves that radiated outward across the eastern Mediterranean with devastating force. Geological evidence from sites across the region documents these giant waves' devastating impact on coastal civilizations. On Crete's northern coastline, marine sediments appear far inland at elevations that could only have been reached by walls of water of extraordinary height and penetrating power. Coastal settlements that had flourished peacefully for centuries simply vanished without trace, their remains scattered by liquid mountains that penetrated miles inland through river valleys and low-lying plains. The precise timing of this catastrophe in relation to cultural decline remains one of archaeology's most intensely debated questions among scholars. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from the blast site consistently points to a destruction date around 1600 BC. Yet clear archaeological evidence for major Minoan decline doesn't appear until several decades later, creating an apparent contradiction that has generated intense scholarly discussion about whether the disaster caused immediate civilization breakdown or initiated a gradual weakening process that culminated later. Recent analysis suggests that the relationship between natural catastrophe and cultural decline was far more complex than simple direct cause and effect. The northern ports that suffered direct wave damage were apparently quickly rebuilt, indicating that immediate aftermath didn't completely overwhelm their recovery capabilities. Nevertheless, the volcanic blast's far-reaching consequences, widespread climate disruption, severe agricultural difficulties, and devastating economic shock may have created accumulating pressures that slowly eroded the very foundations of their sophisticated society over several decades. The remarkably preserved settlement of Crete provides an absolutely extraordinary glimpse into daily life at the precise moment of catastrophe. Volcanic debris fell so rapidly and completely that it created perfect preservation conditions, essentially freezing an entire Bronze Age community, in time like an ancient Mediterranean version of Pompeii. Multi-story residential buildings featuring elaborate wall paintings, advanced plumbing systems, and sophisticated storage facilities reveal the truly remarkable standard of living that these settlements had achieved at their cultural peak. The level of comfort and technological sophistication rivals anything found elsewhere in the Bronze Age world. The notable absence of human skeletal remains throughout Akrotiri's buried ruins tells a compelling story of successful mass evacuation rather than sudden catastrophic disaster. Preliminary earthquake tremors providentially provided sufficient advance warning for most inhabitants to safely flee their homes, carefully taking their most valuable portable possessions with them to safety. The few artifacts deliberately left behind massive storage containers, heavy furniture pieces, and permanent architectural decorations strongly suggest an orderly, planned abandonment rather than panicked flight from immediate danger. This organized evacuation saved countless lives that might otherwise have been lost. The magnificent wall paintings preserved within Akrotiri's houses represent some of the finest artistic achievements discovered anywhere in the Bronze Age world. The celebrated spring fresco depicts graceful swallows darting playfully among blooming lilies in a joyous celebration of natural beauty that perfectly epitomizes their aesthetic values and philosophical worldview. The naval procession scene shows an impressive fleet of ships, transporting both warriors and civilians between various Mediterranean ports, providing invaluable documentation of maritime life, naval technology, and international relationships during this golden age. Climate effects from the massive volcanic explosion extended dramatically far beyond the immediate blast vicinity. Countless particles injected into the upper atmosphere effectively blocked crucial sunlight across vast geographical regions, causing significant temperature drops that severely affected agricultural production from Anatolia to Egypt. Chinese historical records from this exact period document unusually cold summer seasons, while Irish bog core samples show clear evidence of climatic disruption that scientific analysis suggests may have been caused by prolonged winter-like conditions affecting global weather patterns. The economic shock that followed this natural disaster reverberated powerfully throughout the entire eastern Mediterranean commercial system. Trade routes that had operated successfully and profitably for multiple centuries were suddenly disrupted as key commercial ports suffered extensive damage and maritime shipping became extremely hazardous due to floating pumice stones and dramatically altered coastlines. The sophisticated just-in-time delivery systems that had enabled widespread prosperity proved surprisingly vulnerable to large-scale logistical disruption. The interconnected nature of their economy, which had been a tremendous strength during peaceful times, became a dangerous weakness when crisis struck. Agricultural consequences of the volcanic blast may have proven particularly devastating for Crete's densely populated urban communities. Even relatively light amounts of volcanic fallout could render productive agricultural fields completely unusable for several crucial growing seasons. The island's carefully balanced farming system, which had successfully supported large urban populations through intensive cultivation of limited arable land, proved extremely vulnerable to even temporary disruptions in food production capabilities. The psychological impact of such a catastrophic natural event simply cannot be underestimated or overlooked. For a sophisticated culture that had enjoyed multiple centuries of unprecedented prosperity and remarkable security, this disaster dramatically demonstrated the fundamental fragility of human achievement when confronted by overwhelming natural forces. The religious implications alone, Moors questioning why their protective deities had permitted such massive destruction, may have profoundly shaken the spiritual foundations that held their entire society together. Recovery efforts following the initial catastrophe clearly demonstrate the remarkable resilience and determination of this ancient culture. Archaeological evidence shows that many damaged sites were systematically rebuilt, often incorporating significant improvements that applied valuable lessons learned from the disaster experience. New construction techniques provided enhanced earthquake resistance capabilities, while modified urban planning approaches effectively reduced vulnerability to future natural calamities. Their ability to adapt and improve demonstrated genuine cultural strength. However, subtle but significant changes in material culture begin appearing consistently in the archaeological record during this transitional period. Pottery styles became noticeably less elaborate, with simpler decorative schemes gradually replacing the complex naturalistic motifs that had characterized earlier artistic periods. The overall quality of craftsmanship, while still maintaining high standards by contemporary Bronze Age measurements, clearly showed signs of declining available resources and reduced cultural ambition. The Golden Age was slowly fading. The international prestige that had made this society a respected and sought-after partner in Mediterranean diplomacy also suffered gradual but steady erosion over the following decades. Foreign diplomatic texts from this period show measurably decreasing references to Cretan merchants and formal diplomatic contacts. The cultural influence that had successfully spread distinctive artistic styles and technological innovations throughout the Aegean region began to diminish significantly as other emerging powers systematically filled the developing political vacuum. Meanwhile, on the Greek mainland, Mycenaean warrior societies were experiencing rapid population growth and increasing military sophistication. These aggressively martial communities had long admired and borrowed extensively from island achievements, but they organized their growing settlements around military principles rather than commercial cooperation. As Cretan power gradually weakened, mainland Mycenaean influence expanded systematically to fill the emerging regional power vacuum. The balance of Mediterranean power was shifting dramatically toward more militaristic approaches to governance. The fundamental contrast between island and mainland approaches to effective governance became increasingly apparent during this crucial period of political transition. While Crete continued relying primarily on economic coordination and traditional religious authority, the mainland societies developed sophisticated military hierarchies and heavily fortified centers that could respond far more effectively to crisis conditions. The peaceful orientation that had been their greatest civilizational strength now appeared increasingly as a potentially dangerous weakness in a changing world that valued military power over cultural achievement. Commercial systems that had been carefully cultivated and maintained over multiple centuries began shifting their focus toward mainland centers as Mycenaean merchants proved more aggressively competitive and adaptable than their traditional Cretan counterparts. The gradual reorientation of crucial business relationships systematically reduced the economic foundations of Cretan prosperity, while simultaneously strengthening potential rivals who would eventually challenge Cretan dominance directly and successfully. Technological innovations that might have helped Crete adapt effectively to rapidly changing regional conditions were instead flowing outward to mainland communities that could offer superior security guarantees and more reliable long-term partnerships. The peaceful transmission of valuable knowledge that had characterized their golden age now worked directly against the homeland as former students became serious competitors and eventual successors to Mediterranean leadership. Religious practices also displayed clear signs of evolution during this challenging transitional period. The elaborate goddess worship that had characterized classical Cretan spirituality gradually incorporated more masculine and militaristic elements, possibly reflecting growing influence from mainland traditions or practical adaptation to increasingly dangerous times. The magnificent bull-leaping ceremonies that had symbolized perfect harmony between human skill and natural forces became noticeably less prominent in artistic representations, suggesting changing spiritual priorities. The palatial system that had successfully coordinated the entire realm for centuries faced mounting challenges as local communities developed greater political autonomy and independence. Regional centers that had once automatically deferred to Knossos' authority began making independent decisions about business relationships, defensive arrangements, and resource allocation strategies. This administrative decentralization, while perhaps necessary for immediate local survival, significantly weakened the island-wide coordination that had been absolutely crucial to their historical success. Foreign relations became increasingly complex and unpredictable as the traditional Mediterranean balance of power shifted fundamentally. Egypt, facing its own serious internal political challenges, provided less reliable support for Cretan merchants and diplomatic initiatives. Mesopotamian states were experiencing political fragmentation that dramatically reduced their demand for luxury goods and cultural products. The stable international environment that had enabled peaceful expansion was giving way to a more volatile and aggressively militaristic age. Archaeological evidence from late-period sites reveals increasing concern with defense and security considerations. Settlements that had previously operated successfully without any fortifications began constructing protective walls and defensive towers for the first time in their history. The open architectural style that had characterized their buildings for centuries gave way to more protected designs that prioritized security and defense over accessibility and welcome. The sophisticated writing system that had coordinated complex administration also showed clear signs of stress during this difficult period. Linear A tablets from late contexts reveal simplified recording systems and reduced bureaucratic complexity, suggesting declining administrative capabilities. The sophisticated resource management systems that had successfully enabled palace-based coordination for centuries was clearly becoming far less effective as regional conditions grew increasingly difficult and unstable. The peaceful administrative methods that had worked brilliantly during prosperous times proved inadequate for managing crisis situations. Memories of the catastrophic volcanic blast became permanently embedded in later Greek mythological traditions through powerful stories of divine punishment and overwhelming natural catastrophe. The myth of Deucalion's flood, which describes a world-destroying deluge followed by gradual renewal, may actually preserve ancient folk memories of the massive tsunami waves that devastated Aegean communities during this period. These compelling stories, filtered through countless centuries of oral tradition, successfully transformed actual historical catastrophe into timeless moral lessons about human hubris and divine justice that would influence Western literature for millennia. The magnificently preserved artistic treasures discovered at Akrotiri continue providing invaluable insights into the remarkable sophistication of Bronze Age daily life. The famous fisherman fresco shows a young man proudly carrying his fresh catch, painted with such extraordinary naturalistic detail that modern marine biologists can actually identify individual fish species from the artistic representation. The Boxer Boys paintings depict athletic competitions that clearly parallel the contests regularly held at major palatial centers, suggesting shared sporting traditions and cultural values across the entire Aegean region during this golden age. Environmental changes following the volcanic catastrophe significantly affected wildlife populations and natural resource availability throughout the eastern Mediterranean region. Forest ecosystems severely disrupted by falling volcanic debris required decades to recover fully, critically limiting timber supplies that were essential for shipbuilding and major construction projects. Marine life populations, stressed by dramatic physical and chemical changes in seawater composition, may have substantially reduced the fishing yields that had traditionally supported thriving coastal communities throughout their territory. The gradual shift in pottery styles during this transitional period clearly reflects changing aesthetic preferences and quite possibly reduced access to advanced artistic training programs. The flowing naturalistic designs that had magnificently characterized their golden age gradually gave way to more geometric patterns that were significantly easier to execute, but completely lacked the sophisticated naturalism of earlier masterworks. This artistic decline directly paralleled broader cultural changes occurring throughout the entire Mediterranean region as the Bronze Age world transformed from peaceful cooperation to military competition. By 1500 BC, roughly 1 century after the great natural disaster, their culture remained genuinely impressive by any objective contemporary standard, but had clearly passed its absolute peak of regional power and international influence. The great palatial centers still functioned effectively, commercial trade routes still operated profitably, and manufacturing production continued at respectably high levels. However, the specific conditions that had enabled 4 remarkable centuries of unprecedented prosperity were gradually changing in fundamental ways that would soon prove completely irreversible. The stage was systematically being set for the final phase of their independent political rule. To the north, aggressive Mycenaean societies were rapidly developing the military capabilities and political organization absolutely necessary for successful territorial conquest. The peaceful maritime empire that had dominated the Aegean through economic attraction and cultural influence was about to face existential challenges that would test whether its fundamental values could possibly survive in an increasingly militaristic world. The volcanic blast had not destroyed their civilization directly, but it had definitely initiated a complex cascade of changes that gradually undermined the very foundations of Aegean prosperity. What followed would demonstrate both the remarkable resilience of this ancient society and the ultimate fragility of any human achievement when confronted by overwhelming forces beyond its control. The unmistakable signs of fundamental political change appeared gradually across Crete during the 15th century, before the Common Era. Where once linear A tablets had systematically recorded the sophisticated commercial transactions of a peaceful maritime empire, an entirely different script began appearing in administrative centers throughout the island. Linear B, a completely new writing system that recorded an entirely different language, began replacing the traditional administrative records. The transformation was initially subtle, confined primarily to certain governmental buildings and official record-keeping facilities, but it definitively marked the beginning of the end for independent Minoan rule on the territory that had given birth to Europe's first great civilization. Archaeological stratification layers from this crucial period tell a fascinating story of conquest, cleverly disguised as natural cultural evolution. The pottery styles that emerged during these transitional decades, known to modern scholars as late Minoan III B, showed fundamental departures from centuries of established ascetic traditions. Completely gone were the flowing naturalistic designs that had joyously celebrated marine life and natural beauty for generations. In their place appeared rigid geometric patterns, stylized warrior figures, and decorative motifs that clearly reflected mainland Greek cultural influences and military values. The mainland Greeks had arrived not as crude barbarians, brutally overwhelming a sophisticated society, but as ambitious students who had learned their cultural lessons far too well. For multiple centuries, they had carefully admired and systematically absorbed the greatest achievements of their island neighbors. The revolutionary architectural innovations, the advanced artistic techniques, the sophisticated commercial practices that had made Crete the absolute envy of the entire Bronze Age world. Now, equipped with military organization that the peaceful inhabitants simply could not match, they came to claim what they considered their rightful cultural inheritance through force of arms. The political takeover appears to have been remarkably bloodless, at least during its initial phases of implementation. No burn destruction layers mark the transition at major palatial centers. No mass burial sites document widespread resistance and systematic slaughter of the population. Instead, archaeological evidence points to a gradual assumption of administrative control by mainland Greek bureaucrats who clearly understood the tremendous value of preserving the existing economic and social systems they were acquiring rather than destroying them through violence. The Greeks were undoubtedly conquerors, but they were also practical pragmatists who intelligently recognized that destroyed infrastructure served absolutely no one's long-term interests. Preservation of existing systems would benefit both conquerors and conquered. Knossos, the greatest and most magnificent of all ceremonial centers, experienced the most dramatic and visible transformation during this period. The famous throne room that had once hosted priest-kings ruling through spiritual authority and religious charisma now welcomed warrior chiefs whose political power derived entirely from bronze weapons and sophisticated military organization. The Linear B tablets discovered in palace archives record a completely different administrative philosophy, one focused intensively on weapons maintenance, chariot repair schedules, and tribute collection systems, rather than the peaceful resource coordination and commercial management that had characterized earlier centuries. The new Mycenaean rulers intelligently adapted existing architectural structures to serve their military purposes while gradually imposing their own cultural preferences throughout the territory. The elaborate religious ceremonies that had magnificently characterized earlier spiritual life continued operating, but with significantly modified elements that reflected distinctly mainland Greek religious practices and warrior values. Bull-leaping performances still took place regularly in the great courtyards, but they now shared space with martial displays and military reviews that would have been completely foreign to earlier peaceful times. The sacred had been merged with the military. Evidence regarding the precise nature of this crucial transition, whether peaceful absorption or violent conquest, remains frustratingly ambiguous for modern archaeologists. Some excavated sites show clear signs of destruction and sudden abandonment during this period, suggesting armed resistance and forcible military occupation. Others display remarkable continuity in material culture and architectural usage, indicating negotiated transitions or collaborative political arrangements between old and new ruling classes. The historical truth probably varied significantly from location to location depending on specific local circumstances and the attitudes of both conquerors and conquered populations. The systematic transformation of written administrative records provides the clearest available evidence for changing political control throughout the island. Linear A, with its mysterious undeciphered language and sophisticated administrative terminology, completely disappeared from official governmental use within just a few decades of the Greek arrival. Linear B, recording the familiar language of the mainland conquerors, became the standard script for all governmental business and administrative record-keeping. This linguistic shift represented far more than simple administrative convenience or efficiency. It marked a fundamental change in the ethnic and cultural identity of the ruling class itself. The administrative efficiency that characterized mainland Mycenaean governance reflected centuries of careful observation and systematic learning from their Minoan predecessors. The new Greek rulers wisely maintained many existing economic systems and commercial relationships, while systematically adapting them to serve martial rather than purely commercial priorities and objectives. By the 13th century BC, even these carefully modified political arrangements were confronting unprecedented new challenges that would test their very survival. The comprehensive breakdown of Bronze Age civilization that was systematically affecting the entire Eastern Mediterranean world was finally beginning to impact Greek-controlled territories with devastating force. The elaborate ceremonial system that had been intelligently adapted rather than completely destroyed by the original Mycenaean conquest was now facing overwhelming pressures that would ultimately prove far beyond its institutional capacity to handle effectively. The mysterious Sea Peoples, whose devastating raids had represented merely a distant threat during the early period of Greek dominance, were now launching attacks against Mediterranean coastlines with dramatically increasing frequency and military effectiveness. These maritime raiders seemed to appear from nowhere, striking coastal settlements with unprecedented ferocity before vanishing back into the open seas. The sophisticated commercial networks that had successfully sustained both established Minoan traditions and modified Mycenaean economies were rapidly breaking down under relentless pressure from widespread piracy and comprehensive political instability throughout the region. The complex administrative systems that had efficiently coordinated resources across vast territories were proving completely inadequate to handle the unprecedented challenges of systematic civilizational breakdown affecting the entire known world. Climate change during this crucial period added severe environmental pressures to the already overwhelming political and military challenges confronting Mediterranean societies. Extended drought conditions significantly affected agricultural production across the entire Mediterranean basin, while rising sea levels dramatically altered coastal geography and disrupted established settlements that had flourished for centuries. The carefully balanced resource management systems that had successfully sustained dense urban populations for multiple centuries were completely breaking down under multiple simultaneous environmental stresses that overwhelmed traditional coping mechanisms. The final abandonment of the great palatial centers occurred gradually over several decades, rather than through a single catastrophic event that might have preserved their memory more dramatically. Knossos, which had remarkably survived both foreign conquest and cultural adaptation, finally fell completely silent around 1370 BC as its last desperate administrators either fled their positions or died attempting to defend their ancestral roles. Other major centers followed this tragic pattern as the entire ceremonial system of governance and economic coordination systematically dissolved throughout the Greek-controlled world. The end came not with the dramatic destruction that had characterized some earlier historical transitions, but with the quiet whimper of abandonment and gradual decay. The magnificent halls that had once hosted elaborate religious ceremonies and political gatherings stood eerily empty as roofs slowly collapsed and wild vegetation grew freely through the carefully laid paving stones. The sophisticated storage systems that had efficiently coordinated regional economics gradually filled with accumulated debris as no one remained alive to maintain these crucial facilities. Rural communities that were less dependent on the centralized ceremonial system managed to survive significantly longer than the urban centers that had defined this civilization. Some established cultural practices actually persisted in isolated geographical areas for centuries after the great palatial centers had been completely abandoned to the elements. However, the integrated society that had once successfully unified the entire territorial realm was gone forever, leaving behind only scattered fragments of what had once represented Europe's first great civilizational achievement. The enduring memory of what had been accomplished would persist powerfully in the myths and legends that later classical Greeks would weave around the mysterious ruins they discovered on Crete. The legendary labyrinth, the terrifying Minotaur, the mighty King Minos, and his supposedly vast maritime empire became central elements of Greek mythology. These compelling stories preserved distant echoes of genuine historical achievements, even as they systematically transformed complex historical reality into timeless legendary narratives that would captivate imaginations for millennia to come. The actual society was completely gone, but its remarkable legacy would endure permanently in the collective cultural memory of Mediterranean peoples for thousands of years into the future. The Atlantis connection, Plato's vision, and the Minoan hypothesis. 9,000 years before his own time, according to the great Athenian philosopher Plato, there had existed a realm of absolutely extraordinary power and sophisticated achievement. This mysterious society called Atlantis supposedly commanded vast fleets that completely dominated both the Mediterranean and Atlantic oceans, while its magnificent capital city displayed architectural marvels that far surpass anything in the contemporary known world. The inhabitants had allegedly possessed remarkably advanced technology, accumulated tremendous wealth through extensive international commerce, and created artistic works of genuinely unsurpassed beauty and sophistication. Yet their very success apparently contained the fundamental seeds of their ultimate destruction. As accumulated power gradually corrupted their originally noble nature, the gods supposedly struck down their entire domain in a single catastrophic day and night of devastating earthquakes and overwhelming floods that erased all traces of their existence. Plato presented this captivating tale in two of his philosophical dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. According to his detailed account, this remarkable story had been carefully preserved in ancient Egyptian temple records and transmitted to Greece through Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver who had traveled to Egypt approximately 2 centuries earlier. The priests of Sais, who served as keepers of ancient wisdom and historical records, had supposedly shared this cautionary tale with the visiting Greek scholar who brought it back to Athens, where it passed through his family lineage until it reached Plato's own generation. Most scholars in ancient times and for many centuries afterward regarded this lost civilization as primarily a moral allegory rather than historical reality. The story served Plato's philosophical purposes perfectly, brilliantly illustrating how even the most advanced societies could fall victim to dangerous hubris and moral decay. The detailed descriptions of governmental systems, geographical features, and cultural customs provided excellent examples for discussing ideal political arrangements and the complex relationship between virtue and power in human societies. The numerical precision of Plato's account, placing the vanished realm exactly 9,000 years in the past, strongly suggests symbolic rather than literal chronological calculation. This specific time frame positioned the lost domain in a mythical golden age, far enough removed from historical memory to serve as a perfect canvas for philosophical speculation about human nature. The number 9 held special significance in ancient numerological traditions, while the multiplication by 1,000 emphasized the vast temporal distance between the idealized past and Plato's contemporary present. Yet within these detailed descriptions lay elements that would later strike modern researchers as remarkably specific and internally consistent for a purely fictional creation. The circular urban layout with alternating rings of land and water connected by sophisticated bridges and tunnels resembled advanced urban planning principles rather than pure fantasy. The account of naval power, extensive commercial networks, and technological achievements painted a surprisingly detailed picture of prehistoric maritime dominance that seemed almost too specific and coherent to be entirely imaginary. The geography described in Plato's dialogues placed the lost land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the modern Strait of Gibraltar, in the vast Atlantic Ocean. The territory was supposedly larger than Libya and Asia combined, with a capital city featuring magnificent harbors, temples, and royal structures of extraordinary magnificence. Concentric rings of water and land created natural defenses while simultaneously facilitating international commerce, and an elaborate system of canals connected the capital directly to the open sea for maritime access. Plato's description of Atlantean society emphasized both remarkable achievement and tragic moral decline. Initially virtuous and divinely guided, the inhabitants had supposedly created a just and prosperous realm that commanded universal respect throughout the ancient world. Their maritime expertise had enabled them to establish colonies and trading posts across the Mediterranean, while their advanced agricultural techniques supported large populations in comfort and security. However, as generations passed and divine blood became diluted through intermarriage with ordinary mortals, the people grew increasingly proud and acquisitive. Their originally noble nature became corrupted by material success and unlimited power. They began launching aggressive wars of conquest against their peaceful neighbors. When they threatened both Athens and Egypt with invasion, the gods intervened to prevent their triumph, destroying their homeland in a catastrophic natural disaster that left no trace except memory. What if one of history's greatest mysteries actually started with a grain of truth buried in ancient Egyptian temple records? The story becomes even more intriguing when you realize that the original source wasn't just any random tale, but potentially came from the most meticulous record keepers of the ancient world. Think about this for a moment. Ancient Egypt didn't just keep casual notes about their history. These people maintained the most comprehensive archives in the entire Mediterranean region, with temple records that went back literally thousands upon thousands of years. Every major event, every significant occurrence, every piece of important knowledge was carefully documented and preserved by generations of dedicated priests. Now here's where things get really interesting. If these Egyptian temple keepers had actually preserved detailed accounts of some mysterious vanished naval civilization, we're not talking about folklore or random stories passed down through gossip. We're potentially looking at genuine historical memories that have been carefully maintained, refined, and interpreted across countless centuries. But how did this information supposedly make its way from Egyptian temple archives to ancient Greece? This is where Solon enters the picture, and his role makes the entire story surprisingly believable. Multiple ancient sources confirm that this renowned Athenian statesman actually did travel to Egypt, and he didn't just pop in for a quick vacation. Solon spent years immersing himself in Egyptian culture, dedicating extensive time to studying their legal systems, religious practices, and most importantly for our story, their historical records. This wasn't some casual tourist wandering around asking random questions. Solon had built a reputation throughout the ancient world as a man of exceptional wisdom and unshakable integrity. He was exactly the type of distinguished foreign visitor that Egyptian priests would consider worthy of accessing their most sacred and closely guarded ancient documents. Archaeological discoveries from long ago reveal that ancient civilizations achieved incredible sophistication, levels so advanced that even the later Greeks might have thought them otherworldly. Imagine that echoes of such accomplishments were carefully recorded by Egyptian priests, and over centuries became woven into Greek stories, eventually morphing into philosophical legends. This ongoing debate, whether the legend of Atlantis is rooted in fact or pure invention, captures a much larger question about where myth meets memory, where ancient literature blurs with real history, and where the philosophical imagination intersects with the archaeological record. While absolute proof about Atlantis remains out of reach, this centuries-old discussion has had real value. It's driven fresh thinking about how prehistoric people lived, what they accomplished, and how their stories could survive, shift, and grow into our most powerful cultural myths. The intrigue is far from over. As archaeologists make new discoveries, and our analytical tools get sharper, new theories and interpretations keep surfacing, fueled by the allure of a lost world. Whether Plato, the great Athenian philosopher, was inspired by old traditions, or simply conjured his tale from imagination, he undoubtedly succeeded in sparking profound questions about the responsibility that comes with achievement. His story about a long-lost, exceptionally powerful civilization, said to have existed 9,000 years before his own time, became one of the world's most enduring mysteries. Atlantis, as he named it, was depicted as unmatched in technology, artistry, and wealth. Its navy dominated vast oceans, and the capital stunned all who saw it with marvels that surpassed known architecture. Yet, according to the legend, this dazzling civilization sowed the seeds of its own destruction. Its people, growing arrogant and complacent, fell out of favor with the gods. In a single devastating night, A cataclysm smashed Atlantis beneath waves and rubble. In two pivotal works, Timaeus and Critias, Plato described how this account was preserved in Egypt's sacred temples and passed on to Greece by Solon, the wise lawgiver. Solon's travels, documented by several ancient chroniclers, offered a believable path for how the legend moved from Egyptian archives to Greek storytelling. Egyptian priests, renowned for their extensive historical records, might have shared this epic cautionary tale with Solon, who brought it back to Athens, where it was treasured and passed down for generations until it reached Plato. For many centuries, most scholars viewed the tale as a parable, not a true history. Atlantis perfectly illustrated moral lessons. Even the greatest societies can be undone by pride and excess. The detailed governmental systems, sweeping geography, and rich customs in the story gave philosophers plenty to analyze about the relationship between virtue and might. Curious details, like the account's precise 9000-year timeline, seemed more symbolic than literal, spotlighting a mythical golden age far outside real recorded memory. The number 9 carried special weight in ancient numerology, and by multiplying it by 1000, Plato enlarged the temporal gulf between a perfect lost past and his own era. Nevertheless, there were striking features in the story that fascinated later researchers. For instance, the description of Atlantis's capital, a city of alternating rings of land and water, crossed by bridges and tunnels, an image of urban sophistication that seemed far from pure fantasy. Plato spoke of fleets, sprawling networks of trade, and technical marvels that created the image of a prehistoric maritime superpower. He located Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it in the Atlantic, and describing it as vaster than Libya and Asia combined. Its grand capital soared with harbours, temples, and palaces, all surrounded by concentric water and land rings, designed for both defence and international trade. The society itself is painted in two contrasting shades. Initially, its people were noble and just, guided by higher powers. Their talents in engineering, agriculture, and seafaring made them the envy of the ancient world. But over time, as their original divine lineage faded through intermarriage with mortals, pride crept in. Their ambitions soured into greed. They waged wars and plotted expansion. When their ambition threatened places like Athens and Egypt, the gods intervened, destroying their home with a catastrophe so complete that it left only scarce memories behind. Plato's claim that his tale originated from Egyptian records adds another twist to the mystery. Egypt, after all, guarded detailed temple archives that went back longer than any other in the region. If the priests really had evidence of a vanished naval civilization, those records might preserve genuine fragments of truth, albeit filtered by myth and repeated retelling. Solon's own journey to Egypt, confirmed in several ancient texts, provides a realistic link. He was famous for wisdom and honesty, just the sort of person Egyptian scholars would trust with precious secrets. The puzzle of whether Plato invented the legend or built on older stories has captivated scholars for more than 2,000 years. Ancient texts across the Mediterranean refer to forgotten peoples and lost lands, making it plausible that stories like Atlantis were already circulating, just waiting for Plato to combine them into a dramatic, meaningful narrative. For almost 2,000 years after Plato, Atlantis was mostly fuel for philosophical and literary creativity, not scientific research. Occasional speculation flared up in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, but with no way to verify legends or dig deeper, the story remained a thought experiment, a canvas for exploring ideal societies, human hubris, and downfall. Ultimately, the myth of Atlantis not only inspires our imagination, but challenges us to reflect on the fragile line between progress and pride, on history and memory, and on the eternal search for paradise lost. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, everything changed. Archaeology was no longer just about digging up old pots and guessing their use. It was becoming a science. This new approach started to reshape the way people thought about ancient legends like Atlantis. As archaeologists uncovered the true scale of prehistoric civilizations, the idea that Plato's account could contain real historical fragments suddenly didn't seem quite so far-fetched. One bombshell came with Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy. For generations, Troy had been dismissed as pure myth, a poetic invention by Homer, yet here it was, buried in the earth, proving that a story told for centuries could indeed preserve real history. If Troy could rise from the pages of legend into the dirt and stone of archaeology, why not Atlantis? Then came Sir Arthur Evans in the early 1900s. His excavations on Crete revealed what he called the Minoan civilization, a highly advanced culture with massive palaces, stunning artwork, brilliant engineering and maritime strength that seemed straight out of Plato's descriptions. Their prosperity came not from conquest, but from vast trade networks spanning the seas, and just like in the legend, they met a sudden and catastrophic end. Some researchers began to wonder, was the Minoan world, or part of it, the real-life seed behind Plato's allegory? The parallels were hard to ignore. Both stories spoke of advanced architecture, remarkable technology, flourishing art, and peaceful prosperity abruptly destroyed in a cataclysm. Even the timeline gap could have an explanation. Ancient Egyptian records often used lunar months instead of solar years. This could create a 10-to-1 time distortion, shifting Plato's 9,000 years into something much closer to the actual destruction of parts of the Aegean world, around 1500 BC. That date matches almost perfectly with the volcanic eruption of Thera, modern-day Santorini, an event so violent it sent shockwaves, literal and cultural, through the ancient world. The Thera eruption's massive explosion, tsunamis, and sudden climate changes line up eerily well with the disaster Plato described. Imagine the disappearance of an important island center in a single apocalyptic moment, exactly the kind of event people might later explain as the gods' punishment. The archaeological record tells us Bronze Age civilizations could command fleets, establish colonies, and trade across the Mediterranean, just as Atlantis supposedly did. Their art often celebrated nature and the sea, with marine imagery that fits the legend's maritime character perfectly. Still, there are major obstacles to a perfect match. Plato's geography, placing a landmass larger than Libya and Asia beyond Gibraltar, doesn't fit any known site. Political structures in his story resemble classical Greece far more than Bronze Age societies, and his emphasis on moral lessons suggests the purpose was not to map a lost nation, but to teach through allegory. That hasn't stopped an endless stream of theories. Over the centuries, would-be discoverers have found Atlantis everywhere, from the Black Sea to Antarctica. Most of these rely on cherry-picking the text to fit a favored location, ignoring the parts that don't match. Serious historians, on the other hand, stick to a more cautious idea that Plato may have woven real, ancient memories into a fictional framework designed to explore philosophical ideas about power, virtue, and downfall. It's certainly plausible that Egyptian temple records preserved some memory of a once great maritime culture, possibly connected to the Aegean world. Egypt had deep and well-documented ties with ancient seafaring societies, and temple priests were famed for conserving historical records across generations. Myths often carry echoes of real events. Think of the great flood tales from the Bible, Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh, or Greek myths of world-ending disasters. Each could be a cultural memory of real, devastating geological or climatic events, passed down and reshaped until they became legend. Atlantis may well be the same, a blend of historic kernels and philosophical storytelling. Its image of a shining golden age brought low by greed and arrogance taps into something universal, which is why it has survived more than 2,000 years. Whether true or not, it still sparks conversations about history, morality, and the surprising ways human memory can span millennia. Even without absolute proof linking history to legend, the striking similarities between amazing archaeological discoveries and ancient stories show just how powerfully human imagination and lived experience blend together to create myths that last for ages. Picture the scene. It's a crisp spring morning in 1900, deep in the olive groves of Crete. A young British archaeologist named Arthur Evans stands among the trees, clutching some mysterious clay fragments etched with long-forgotten symbols. He's intrigued. These tiny seal stones, which had fascinated him for months in Athenian antique shops, hold secrets no one has cracked. Now, after buying the very patch of land where local farmers kept unearthing such artifacts, Evans is on the brink of an archaeological revolution. As he begins his excavations at this ancient site, Evans' team starts to uncover wonders almost beyond imagination. Breathtaking frescoes come to light, showing elegant women in colorful gowns and young men performing gravity-defying flips over wild bulls, scenes bursting with energy and style that no one expected from a Bronze Age culture. Massive storerooms packed with giant clay jars hint at a level of organized trade and economic power nobody had guessed existed for so long. Most impressive of all, the construction techniques are so advanced that they upend every idea people had about the so-called primitive people of the distant past. Soon, Evans's dramatic restoration work becomes almost as famous as the discoveries themselves. Working with the limited conservation methods available at the time, he makes choices that would spark debate for decades. Where wooden pillars had rotted away, he replaces them with concrete. Faded frescoes are brought back to life in bold colors based on tiny, sometimes incomplete fragments. Steel beams support ancient walls that risk collapse. The spectacular throne room at Knossos, with seats carved from gypsum and surrounded by regally painted griffins, quickly turns into a symbol of both a lost civilization's splendor and the archaeologist's bold creative vision. Tourists visiting these restored corridors feel swept back to a luxurious palace life, though really they're walking through Evans's interpretation as much as true antiquity. Not everyone is convinced by his methods. Critics complain that much of the reconstruction owes more to early 20th century fantasy than to historical reality. Materials like bright red concrete, they argue, were a far cry from the building substances the original Minoans actually used, while the vivid recreations sometimes fill in more with guesswork than with solid evidence. It's like a Greek Disneyland, some charge, making the ancient world look more like Edwardian dreams than the weathered ruins that survived millennia. But others argue that without these daring reconstructions, the magic of the site would be lost. Who's inspired by broken stones and faded debris? By filling in the blanks, Evans helped millions of visitors experience the drama and luster of an ancient world that would otherwise feel distant and lifeless. The debate over restoring the past versus preserving its fragments would last a century. The timing of these discoveries couldn't have been more dramatic. The early 1900s marked a period where Europe was questioning long-held ideas about civilization, progress, and where its roots truly lay. The astonishing realization that sophisticated societies once flourished in Europe long before the Greeks was a thunderbolt to conventional history. Suddenly, the Greek world wasn't the start of everything. It was part of a much older flow. Nations pounced on these discoveries to craft new identities. Greek thinkers used the finds to build a story of heritage, stretching back to the mists of prehistory. British scholars championed their country's role in unlocking Europe's forgotten past. German academics built sweeping theories about migration and identity by studying the imagery and bones dug up in Crete. This wave of rediscovery also ignited the creative scene. Artists and designers thrilled to the flowing, natural lines and free-spirited figures of Minoan art, which stood in stark contrast to the ordered forms of classical Greece. Painters and architects borrowed ancient motifs for the wildly popular Art Nouveau style, transforming everything from furniture to fashion. The enigmatic figurines of serpent priestesses, holding snakes with an air of command, became emblems of powerful, wise women, iconic symbols for a modern age rethinking gender roles and spirituality. Writers like H.D. and Robert Graves drew inspiration from this vision of a golden matriarchal mythic age, filling their work with images of lost priestesses, goddess worship, and harmony with nature, a romantic alternative to an increasingly industrialized and war-driven world. Almost from the start, interpretations of these finds ran wild, especially when it came to the status of women. The palace art seemed to show women as central figures, goddesses and priestesses appearing as equals, if not leaders in society. This encouraged a whole school of thought. Maybe, just maybe, Crete's lost civilization was female-centered, a peaceful golden era ruled by the values of the divine feminine. The serpent priestesses, proud, fearless, wise, became famous icons of women's empowerment. Yet, as later scholars pointed out, these bold readings owed more to modern hopes and fantasies than to careful archaeological evidence. The prominent women may have been high-status figures, yes, but they just as easily could have thrived in a society still run by men. Still, the myth of powerful, independent ancient women continued to inspire both popular culture and scholarship, feeding new movements that celebrated female leadership, spiritual authority, and alternate models for society. Whether or not Crete truly was a matriarchy, the legend proved enduring and influential. Meanwhile, archaeological methods raced ahead. In the decades after Evans' first discoveries, scientists developed new techniques for excavating, dating, and analyzing ancient remains. They found out that the story was even more complex than the narratives pieced together by the first explorers. The peaceful image of Minoan society, for instance, was shaken by the discovery of sites suggesting ritual sacrifice, evidence that real life on ancient Crete included both art and violence. The timeline of development turned out to be far more intricate than first thought. Most surprising of all, cutting-edge DNA research has revealed the true roots of Crete's long-vanished civilization. Instead of exotic newcomers sweeping in, genetic evidence shows the Minoans descended directly from local Neolithic farming communities that had thrived on the island for millennia. They were not outsiders. They were homegrown innovators, building their extraordinary society on foundations laid by generations before. Far from disappearing without a trace, modern science reveals that the people of ancient Crete are still with us, in a very real way. DNA studies show that their genetic line continues in the island's modern inhabitants, proving that these weren't a vanished race wiped away by catastrophe. Political upheavals may have toppled their palaces, but their bloodlines, traditions, and ways of life carried forward. This completely changes the old romantic idea of a mysterious people lost to time. Instead, we see a rich story of cultural continuity, the same land, the same people, evolving through the centuries. Today, archaeologists digging across Crete, in places like Zakros, Palekastro, and Gornia, are uncovering a far more complete picture of this prehistoric world. It's not just the massive palace complexes that matter anymore. Villages, rural sanctuaries, workshops, and trade hubs tell us that the island was part of a tightly woven network of communities, each contributing to a complex and thriving system. One of the most mind-blowing finds came from Akrotiri on the island of Thera, preserved almost perfectly beneath volcanic ash for 3,500 years. Here, entire streets, multi-story houses, painted walls, and even furniture have survived in astonishing detail. Unlike the early reconstructions at Knossos, what you see here is exactly what the ancient builders made. No guesswork, no concrete stand-ins, just pure time capsule preservation. And now, technology has transformed how we experience these worlds. Instead of physically rebuilding ruined walls, researchers use 3D laser scans, precise measurements, and forensic analysis to virtually recreate the splendor of the past. These digital reconstructions can show you bustling ancient streets and colorful interiors without touching a single original stone. Visitors can walk through palaces with VR headsets, seeing rooms and courtyards as they looked millennia ago, all while the real ruins remain untouched for study. But the question remains, what should we do with the concrete-heavy restorations from the early 1900s? Some say it's time to strip them away and reveal the untouched remains for modern analysis. Others argue that these reconstructions are now part of history themselves, capturing the vision, creativity, and even mistakes of early archaeology. In recent years, the compromise has been to keep them, but clearly label what's ancient and what's modern, so visitors can see both the original artifacts and the way history was interpreted a century ago. With modern techniques, archaeologists now focus on untouched areas, revealing details early excavators could never have imagined. Microscopic traces of paint, fibers from ancient clothing, pollen from gardens, all help piece together a day in the life of this Bronze Age wonder. And what has emerged rewrites our understanding of Europe's prehistoric past. The lesson is clear: sophisticated art, engineering, trade, and governance existed long before the rise of classical Greece or Rome. These discoveries have transformed education. Students today learn that creativity in complex societies didn't begin in Athens. They flourished on Crete centuries earlier. Evidence shows these islanders traded across seas, built advanced water systems, and created elegant art while living in comparative peace. That peace and the cooperative networks that sustained it have become modern symbols of a different way a society can thrive, one built more on commerce, artistry, and diplomacy than invasion. And our fascination hasn't faded. The colors, symbols, and myths of ancient Crete have spilled into film, novels, TV dramas, video games, and even high fashion runways. Designers imitate the swirls of Minoan frescoes. Game developers let players build palaces and manage trade routes as Bronze Age rulers. New Age and spiritual movements have adopted snake goddess imagery, labyrinth meditation, and divine feminine rituals, sometimes inspired by archaeological finds, sometimes by modern imagination. In the academic world, debates rage on: was Minoan society truly peaceful? Did women really hold the power so many artists and writers imagine? New digs and high-tech analysis frequently overturn old ideas. International teams now work together to understand the larger Mediterranean context, comparing Crete's achievements with Egypt's, Mesopotamia's, Anatolia's, and mainland Greece's. Patterns emerge: shared technologies, parallel religious symbols, and trade links that bound together an ancient globalized world. The artifacts themselves remain spellbinding: the snake priestess figurines, the vibrant bull-leaping frescoes, the graceful pottery. These objects still have the power to pull thousands of years into the present, whispering stories of a people whose creativity shaped the course of Europe's history. Arthur Evans's work, controversial as it was, changed more than one site. It changed how the world thinks about interpreting the past. He took chances, imagined boldly, and in doing so sparked generations of research. Modern archaeologists are more cautious, but they continue building on the foundation he laid, asking the same big questions he did over a century ago. How do people first build cities? What balance of leadership and cooperation creates stability? What forces, both natural and human-made, can bring even the greatest achievements crashing down? Today, with DNA sequencing, satellite mapping, and ultra-precise dating, we are peeling back the layers of prehistory faster than ever. But the core of the mystery remains. The people of ancient Crete continue to speak to us, not in words we can read, but in images, architecture, and ideas that still resonate. Their story is a mirror for our own times, proof of human genius and cooperation, but also a reminder of our fragility. In the ruins of their palaces, in the ceramics shaped by their hands, in the fragments of their art, the voices of 4,000 years cry out: the past is not gone, it's waiting. And with curiosity, creativity, and persistence, we have the power to find it again.